The National Electrical Code, or NEC, provides specific guidelines for receptacle placement in commercial buildings to ensure safety and functionality. There are two main rules to consider: firstly, the 6 feet rule, and secondly, the 12 feet rule. The 6 feet rule states that receptacles must be placed every 6 feet, which is approximately 1.83 meters, along all walls where electrical equipment is likely to be plugged in. This is to ensure that users do not need to use extension cords to reach power outlets, which can be a safety hazard. The 12 feet rule states that receptacles must be placed every 12 feet, or 3.66 meters, along walls where no electrical equipment is expected to be plugged in. This rule applies to areas where the primary use is not for powering equipment, but receptacles are still needed for general use. However, there are exceptions to these rules. Receptacles may be placed farther apart than 6 feet if the space is used for specific purposes, such as storage or mechanical rooms, where frequent access to power is not required. Receptacles may also be placed farther apart than 12 feet if the space is used primarily for circulation, such as hallways or corridors, where the need for electrical outlets is minimal. In addition to the spacing requirements, the NEC also addresses the overall number of receptacles needed in a commercial space. The NEC mandates that the number of receptacles must be sufficient to provide for the load requirements of the space. This means that the total power demand of all the electrical equipment that will be used in the space must be considered when determining the number of receptacles. While the NEC does not provide a specific footage rule for receptacles, it does offer a calculation method to determine the required number. The NEC assumes that each receptacle has a load of 180 volt amperes. This value represents the amount of power that a typical device plugged into the receptacle is expected to draw. To determine the total number of receptacles needed, firstly determine the total lighting and appliance load for the space. This involves adding up the power consumption of all the lights, appliances, and other electrical equipment that will be used in the space. The power consumption of each device is usually listed on its nameplate or in its product documentation. Secondly, divide the total load by 180 volt amperes. This calculation will give you the minimum number of receptacles required to handle the total electrical load. For example, if the lighting and appliance load for a commercial space is 2500 volt amperes, the number of receptacles required would be 2500 volt amperes divided by 180 volt amperes, which equals 13.89. Therefore, at least 14 receptacles would be required for this space to meet the NEC requirements. In addition to these rules and calculations, there are other considerations to keep in mind when planning receptacle placement. Firstly, receptacles should be placed in easily accessible locations. This means that they should be located where they can be easily reached and used without having to move furniture or other obstructions. Secondly, receptacles should be placed in accordance with the NEC and any applicable local codes. Local codes may have additional requirements or restrictions on receptacle placement, so it is important to check with the local authorities to ensure compliance. Because electrical codes can be complex, it is always advisable to consult with a qualified electrician to determine the specific receptacle placement requirements for a given commercial building. A qualified electrician can assess the specific needs of the space and ensure that the receptacle placement meets all applicable codes and regulations. Understanding and following these NEC guidelines for receptacle placement is essential for ensuring the safety and functionality of electrical systems in commercial buildings. By adhering to the spacing requirements, load calculations, and other considerations, you can help prevent electrical hazards and ensure that the space has adequate power for its intended use. The NEC guidelines ensure electrical safety and proper functionality in commercial buildings. The 6 feet rule mandates receptacles every 6 feet where equipment is plugged in, preventing overuse of extension cords and minimizing trip hazards. The 12 feet rule sets a 12 feet spacing for walls without dedicated equipment, ensuring general accessibility without oversaturation. Exceptions allow flexibility for specialized areas. Storage or mechanical rooms may require fewer receptacles due to infrequent use. Circulation areas such as hallways also warrant fewer outlets due to minimal power needs. The NEC requires sufficient receptacle quantity based on load requirements, which involves calculation to avoid overloads and ensure efficient power distribution. Each receptacle is rated at 180 volt amperes for load calculation purposes. Estimate total lighting and appliance load by summing the power consumption of all electrical devices. Divide the total load by 180 volt amperes to determine the minimum number of receptacles. For instance, a 2500 volt amperes load necessitates at least 14 receptacles. Accessibility is crucial, ensuring easy reach without obstructions. Compliance with local codes is mandatory, supplementing NEC requirements and potentially including additional regulations. Consulting a qualified electrician ensures accurate interpretation and adherence to all applicable codes, which is crucial because electrical codes can be complex and can vary. Correct receptacle placement prevents hazards, optimizes power availability, and ensures safety. By following the NEC, electrical systems in commercial buildings will be reliable and compliant, avoiding dangerous situations. This methodical approach guarantees a safe, functional, and code-compliant electrical environment.